Hello, Community Bible students. Throughout the Old Testament, people invoke God's steadfast love as they begin a project based on faith. For example, in Genesis chapter 24, we find Abraham living in the middle of the Canaanites in the promised land, but he does not want his son Isaac to marry a local woman. He prefers the idea of a bride from his own extended family, which is located in a city hundreds of miles away in Mesopotamia. He sends his servant on a journey to find Mrs. Right for Isaac in his old hometown of Nahor. The servant arrives in Nahor without much idea of how to locate this woman, but he knows he can count on God, who has always displayed favor towards Abraham. In verse 12, the servant prays, "O Lord God of my master Abraham, please grant me success and show steadfast love to my master Abraham." The Lord graciously answers the prayer by bringing the servant together with Rebekah, Isaac's future wife. We see God's steadfast love at work as he provides a future for Abraham, for Isaac, and for Rebekah. In this case, divine steadfast love is displayed by an immediate and happy response, but it has an effect that lasts for the rest of history. In another example, we hear Moses speaking to the people of Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 7. He is preparing them to enter the land that God has promised Abraham hundreds of years before, and they will face many obstacles, including nations that seem more powerful than them. But in verses 9 through 10, he gives this assurance. "Know therefore that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations, and repays to the face of those who hate him by destroying them." God's steadfast love is displayed as a covenant or agreement to never leave those who follow him. He assures the Israelites that he will destroy their enemies and give the Israelites a permanent home. Divine steadfast love promises success in the task that God has given. Our commentary this week defines the phrase steadfast love as the unchanging, unshakable love God has for us. It is based on his commitment to act in our best interests and to those who place their faith in him. Our Psalms this week give us multiple examples of this covenant in action. They show that God's steadfast love proves his unbreakable bond to us. God makes his covenant of love available to everyone, but we can choose to reject it. The first stanza of Psalm 36 describes the person who thinks he does not need to respond, the wicked man. Verse 4 says, "He plots trouble while in his bed. He sets himself in a way that is not good. He does not reject evil." Now, we don't usually see ourselves like this. We give ourselves a pass of some sort when we plan things that do not reflect God's will and character. For example, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet, or that doesn't hurt anyone. But Jesus makes it clear that accepting God's love means we have to extend it to others, even if that means we can't break a few eggs. In the parable of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25, He makes it clear that on the day of judgment, those who ignore or do evil to even the least significant people will not receive a place in heaven. Those who reject evil and do good are responding to God's steadfast love by sharing it with others. Jesus says of these people in the parable, "And the king will answer them, 'Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me.'" Those who love God and respond have a future with him. But the psalmist looks at the wicked in 36:12 and observes, "There the evildoers lie fallen. They are thrust down, unable to rise." For those who choose to follow God, Psalm 36 promises shelter and provision and a different sort of life. 36:9 says, "For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light." Jesus tells us that access to this fountain of life and the light of God comes through belief in his saving power. In John 7:38, he says that whoever believes in him will have rivers of water coming out of their heart. God's steadfast love is so great that we cannot help but pass it along to others. It is not a limited resource to be hoarded, but something that flows through us and satisfies everyone around us. In John 8:12, Jesus says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." When we follow the example of Jesus and embrace his steadfast love, he gives us clarity in how to behave and illumination on how to navigate our path toward heaven. Psalm 103 also shows us what we experience from the steadfast love of God. The promises of this song of praise have a special place in my heart. One of our pastors at our church in the Bay Area, back when I was living there, challenged us to memorize it in 2008. And that was a very difficult year for me. I had sunk into a bit of a depression as I realized I would not recover from my spinal cord injury. My wife and I had also separated, and an infection resulted in a hospital incident that nearly killed me. But in these verses, David challenged me to repeat after him, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all your iniquity, who heals all your disease, who redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with steadfast love and faithfulness, who satisfies you with good, so that your youth is renewed like the eagles." Even in the worst times, God's steadfast love shows that we have a future filled with wonderful benefits. The Lord forgives all the rotten things we do to ourselves and to others. He saves us from disease, which may destroy our bodies, but cannot ravage our souls. He brings us back from death until the time he chooses to take us home. This was especially apparent to me after the hospital incident. After 7 minutes of CPR, the doctors and nurses helped call me back from a brief trip to the pit. He makes his love and his mercy a crown that makes people notice something different about us. This diadem sparkles and shows that we are blessed in a way that transcends our circumstances. Finally, God satisfies us with good in a way that gives us strength to accomplish whatever tasks he appoints for us. No wonder David says in 103:11, our memory verse, "For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love toward those who fear him. In verse 13, he says, as a father has compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him. This metaphor of God as a merciful parent drives home the nature of his steadfast love. It is an unbreakable bond between him and us. Psalm 107 begins with, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. For his steadfast love endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he has redeemed from trouble." The psalmist uses 4 vivid metaphors to show God's redemptive love in action. Some of God's people wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to a city to dwell in. Others sat in darkness and in the shadow of death, prisoners of affliction and in irons. Some were fools through their sinful ways, and because of their iniquities suffered affliction. And yet others took ships out onto the ocean, only to encounter a storm and great waves that raised them up to heaven and down to the depths. This reminds me of how alarming large swells of the sea can seem. For example, when I was surfing, if we would be sitting on our boards and suddenly a massive set would come in, and then we would be raised up on our boards high into the air and then suddenly sink deep in the trough between waves. That was the time you knew that you either surfed or you dove under the wave, because things were about to get very scary. Like that, our circumstances can feel totally out of our control. But like the scattered people of God, we can respond to our hopeless situations by calling out to the Lord. In each of the metaphors, the psalmist tells us, "Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress." God often displays his steadfast love by saving us when we are the most powerless. He redeems us when we are at our worst. Psalm 107 goes on to show that God does not just restore us from misfortune and sin, but he reverses everything that we might expect. He turns deserts into pools of water, a parched land into springs of water. This renewed land provides a home for God's people and a place of blessing for them. We see this reversal of what we would expect in the teachings of Jesus. For example, Matthew 18, verse 4. "Whoever humbles himself like a child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." And Matthew 23, 10 through 11. "The greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." Jesus shows us that by reversing our expectations and thinking completely differently, we can effectively build his kingdom of joy and fulfillment that will amaze our world. They will notice that we have an unbreakable bond of steadfast love with our God. Psalm 136 drives home the point that God's steadfast love stays with us in all phases of life. It goes through the story of creation and recounts the exodus of the people of Israel from the land of Egypt. The song continues with the conquest of the promised land. And after each phrase, it repeats, "His steadfast love endures forever." 136 reminds us that in every step of our journey, God upholds us and carries us with unrelenting love. Nothing can separate us from his goodness, and we will enjoy it through every moment of our lives. God's steadfast love proves our unbreakable bond with Him. Last month, the devotional booklet, Our Daily Bread, included a short passage by Karen Pimpo that drives home the message that God's steadfast love endures forever. I also think it points to the intensity that God feels in His love for us. And I will read it to close. One of the most dramatic and mysterious love letters of all time was penned by composer Ludwig van Beethoven and was only discovered after his death in 1827. The hastily handwritten letter is full of passionate lines like, "My eternally beloved, I can either live wholly with you or not at all." Tragically, it appears the letter was never sent, and his intended recipient remains unknown. Beethoven's letter is treasured by readers who can identify with his desperate yearning for love. We seek love and fulfillment in many people, things, and experiences that cannot truly satisfy. But far greater than a fleeting romance is the love of God for His covenant people, to whom He showed great love for the sake of all people. Through the prophet Jeremiah, God declared, "I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with unfailing kindness." Because of His great love, God promised a future of rest and favor, and the restoration of everything that was broken. Despite their repeated rejection and rebellion, God vowed to bring them back to Himself. Many years later, that same everlasting love motivated Jesus to endure death for sinners, even before we ever returned His love. We don't have to search for love or try to earn it. We are already loved with an everlasting love. Let's thank God for the steadfast love He has shown us through Jesus. In Jesus, we have assurance and proof that we have an unbreakable bond with God. And through us, God will extend this connection to the world around us. Our challenge for the week: how will you share God's steadfast love with others?